The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
So welcome to the webinar with RAPIDI Online. Sorry for the delay. We had a technical issue broadcasting or starting the broadcast, but we are online now. With me, I have Sean RAPIDI, who's head of our customer success. My name is Henning, and I'm integration advisor at RAPIDI. Let me take you through what we're going to go through today. Please note that we have handout uploaded to the handout section, which you can download. If you have any questions, please use the question and answer section that we have. And when you have it, when we get the questions, we will answer them as quickly as we can or at the end of the session. The most common integrations that we do between Microsoft Dynamics and Salesforce, on the Salesforce side is the Service Cloud and the Sales Cloud, and the Microsoft Dynamics side, we support all versions. We have, as an example here today, the Microsoft Dynamics 365 Business Central, and we have the Finance and Operations. But we also support all versions back to the Microsoft Dynamics products that were launched from the late 80s and all the way up till today. And we are also committed to support any future versions of Microsoft Dynamics. RAPIDI Online is a cloud data integration platform, which means that everything we do sits in the cloud. You don't have to install RAPIDI Online of any of your servers. And when we do an integration, we have a direct transfer of data without any kind of staging, which means that we read and we write directly between the systems. And we don't have any of your data stored on any servers anywhere else than inside of your application, which is the most robust and secure way of doing integration. We support multiple endpoints, databases, and companies, which means that regardless how complex your integration is, we can support that with one and the same data integration tool, which makes it a lot easier for you. We also have a no programming approach, which means that we don't have to do any kind of programming to set up your integration inside of RAPIDI Online. That eases a lot around the implementation. We don't have to do test of code. We don't have errors in the program itself. So you can really concentrate on doing the integration and make sure that we match the business processes that you want to have. We don't have any kind of programming inside of Microsoft Dynamics or Salesforce either. And on the Salesforce side, it's not a big deal, but on the Microsoft Dynamics side, especially if you're running some of the older versions, it's quite important from an upgrade perspective that we don't jeopardize your upgrade path. So with RAPIDI Online, you have a very light touch model where you can go ahead and upgrade without any real impact on the integration itself. As I also mentioned, we are supporting future versions as well. So once you are on RAPIDI Online, we will make sure that the integration works with any of the versions that you might be using either now or in the future. We also support integration between any versions of the applications you might have. So if you have more than one application, or more than one version, then we can also do integration between those in one and the same tool. We support any data that you have inside of Salesforce or Microsoft Dynamics, which means all the different tables, customers, prices, products, etc. If you have customizations, those are also supported. It's just as easy to integrate customized tables and fields as it is if it was a standard field. And if you add apps to Microsoft Dynamics or Salesforce, those would also be included in the integration if they sit inside of the database. I have an example of from the Sales Cloud, which is our quote to cash example, and we start as a lead inside of Salesforce. You might have web orders coming in directly to the ERP. The integration is basically the same. The flow would just be slightly different. But for the sake of the presentation, we'll just start as a lead inside of Salesforce. A lead is being created in Salesforce, is being qualified by marketing, and if it's a good lead, it's handed over to sales. And a standard Salesforce feature is that you can convert a lead to an account, a contact, and an opportunity. This is all standard Salesforce functionality. An opportunity can carry a quote. It does not have to, but it can. You might also want to use Salesforce CPQ if you want to apply guided selling, or if you have more advanced quotation requirements, and that would also be supported. But basically, you would work inside of Salesforce until it becomes a one opportunity. So when you change the stage inside of Salesforce to, for instance, closed won or any other criteria that you define, RAPIDIONLINE will pick it up and create the customer inside of Microsoft Dynamics. If it does not exist already, it would create the contact if you choose to do so. And it will convert the quote or the opportunity to an open sales order inside of Microsoft Dynamics. Because it's very convenient for the salespeople to track the status of the open orders for their clients, we synchronize back the open orders into a specific RAPIDIONLINE object. So the salespeople can see directly in Salesforce the status and any changes that happens inside of Microsoft Dynamics on the open orders. That means that they don't have to switch forth and back between the different systems, and they can give a good customer support and with the accurate data right away. When an order is invoiced, what happens is that we synchronize the posted invoice into the sales history object in Salesforce, which means that now the salesperson can also see that there has been an invoice created, and we bring over the same information as you have inside of Microsoft Dynamics, which means that you have the sales header and you have the sales lines, and you have all the data you want from those two objects. And if you have, for instance, a product on a sales line, that is master related to the product inside of Salesforce, so you can use the advanced reporting capabilities in Salesforce for further reporting and statistics. You might also want to include credit memos as part of this process, so the sales history is accurately updated with the right transactions. When we synchronize the invoice, then we remove the open order. So whenever you look in Salesforce, you would get an accurate overview of what are your open orders, what is your posted invoices, etc. When you receive payments from the client, it's typically posted and recorded as a ledger entry inside of Microsoft Dynamics. And we can also pick these ledger entries and bring them back as payments into Salesforce, link to the specific invoice, link to the account, which means that you can see whether an invoice has been paid or not. And you can also create roll-up summary fields where you, for instance, can see outstanding amounts on a customer. This is quite convenient if you have, for instance, a sales organization that has multiple orders and invoices on your customers, so an ongoing relationship. And if there is an outstanding payment before you place the next order, it might be a good time to give them a reminder that it would be nice to get the invoice paid before you process the next order if it's overdue. So this is a very typical process. We can have all other sorts of flows embedded. Of course, in order to do a quote to order integration, we need some underlying information, for instance, the item to product and pricing information accurately updated. The most common thing is to have the products and the pricing maintained inside of Microsoft Dynamics. And then we bring that into the products and the price books inside of Salesforce. And then you can work on the pricing inside of Salesforce. And when you convert the opportunity to an order, we can take the exact pricing you have quoted to the client and bring that back into Microsoft Dynamics. So that's a very lean and this accurate way of working. There are a lot of good reasons for why integrating Salesforce with Microsoft Dynamics. It's two very complementary systems, and it is a very common way of working with business application nowadays. This is actually taken from different projects that we have fulfilled during the last couple of years, and we've tried to categorize it a little bit to what the main drivers are. Of course, when you activate existing data coming from Microsoft Dynamics in Salesforce, you can have the good 360-degree customer view directly in Salesforce, where you can also fuel your Salesforce org with other data. what is actually a very common driver is to enable internal teams to collaborate, because when they can get the actual and accurate overview of a given customer, then team members can actually help each other processing change requests or other things directly, which gives a better collaboration internally in the organization. Efficiency is a big driver. Of course, the manual double data entries are significant. It's a killer for any sales organization if they have to create double data entries in the systems, especially around orders and customers. And if you don't have an automatic data integration, what happens is that very soon you would run into data issues because they forget to update one or the other system. When you run an integration, once you have created new data, if you have modified the data, then it is seamlessly updated in the other system. So you would always have two systems that are in sync. I already mentioned that we eliminate the need to switch between systems. It also has a license impact, because very often the salespeople no longer need to have access directly into Microsoft Dynamics, but they can actually do their entire work inside of Salesforce, which is a preferred way of working for most people. And then, of course, we eliminate the rework, and by automating some of the processes, for instance, the quote to cash, we have a process automation, which also secures the order fulfillment, that everything is timely processed inside of your organization without a need for human interference in the order creation process. It gives consistent data, so it has a huge impact on quality. This is actually one of the great benefits from doing the integration. You have data that you can trust, and especially if you are responsible for doing any kind of reporting, then you want to make sure that if you pull a report from any of the two systems, that it is based on the same data. So whatever data you have is the same in both systems. And it's actually increased the user adoption inside of especially Salesforce, that when you have data also from the ERP system in there, it increases the user adoption because people just use the system much more. They don't have the feeling that they have to do all the work themselves, but the system actually works for them rather than the other way around. And then very often it's a growth scenario. What we get as feedback from our clients is that typically it gives a much better decision support. It gives better customer engagement processes when you have data that you can trust. There's a lot of companies that have been onboarding the Salesforce to Dynamics integration in the past 10 years. We're not really industry specific, because when we work on data level, it doesn't really matter if you are in one industry or the other. But what is important here is that they all have had basically the same need, either to integrate the Sales Cloud or the Service Cloud with Microsoft Dynamics. And they've all been using the same method and the same tools as we'll be talking about today. And of course, references will be available in case you want to dive into any of these. Let's talk a little bit about RAPIDIONLINE and what it is. RAPIDIONLINE is an open data integration platform. We have the ability to connect to different databases directly. So for instance, we can connect directly to Microsoft SQL. We also have application APIs, which is used when we do more advanced integrations. Typically, this is what we use when we integrate Salesforce and Microsoft Dynamics. And we also support more generic data integration technologies, such as REST and SOAP, which is used to build integration to other third-party solutions. On top of the generic data integration platform from RAPIDIONLINE, we have built standard integrations. And this is something that you will benefit from and which we will talk about today. So we have a standard integration built between Salesforce and Microsoft Dynamics for all the different ERP systems that they have. So we have a template that you can use as a starting point. So for instance, the quote to cash example I started with is fully supported in our templates today. So all the pre-work of mapping fields and setting up the right sequence, all of that comes out of the box in the templates ready to use, either as a starting point for the integration or as a turnkey solution. This is something that reduces the need for spending time on doing detailed field mapping. And it also, of course, makes sure that once you get started, you start at a much higher level. So the quality of your integration is much higher than if you try to build it from scratch. If we look at the RAPIDIONLINE platform itself, as I mentioned already, it sits in the cloud. We have the possibility to do data mapping, which is basically choose which table and fields you want to integrate between the two systems. We have a scheduler, which we use to define how frequent we want to synchronize the data. You can have as many schedules and you can have as many mappings as you want, and you can set different rules for the different schedules, which means that you can set up a specific schedule for your data so you have the right data update frequency that match your business process. If you're working with any of the on-premise Microsoft Dynamics systems, we have a RAPIDI connector, which is connecting the on-premise systems to the cloud in a very secure way through your firewalls. You only need to open one outbound port, and then we create a secure tunnel for the integration through that, so your ERP data will not be exposed to the internet. From an operational perspective, we have a log with notifications. So we don't log any of your data, but we log the activities that happens in the integration, which means that, for instance, if you run a transfer and there is a data error in there, we would log that and you would be notified that there is a data error. All you need to do to solve a data error is actually just to correct the data in the source system. And the next time the schedule is run, it will pick up the change, eliminate the error, and continue to run. So it's a very nice way of working. You can set up the rules for when you want to get notified, so it matches your normal work process. We have a data toolbox, which is a very important part of RAPIDIONLINE. It is optimized for the Salesforce to Microsoft Dynamics integration, which means that we have a lot of functions and features, and also on our platform level, we have done a lot of tricks to optimize the integration so it runs according to the special needs of the different applications. So it's much deeper than a generic data integration tool. A very often task is to align different field types between the two systems. So you might have a lookup field in one system, which is a pick list in the other system. And with the data toolbox, you can do the mapping so you can have different data in the two systems, but they can still integrate between the two. So we have a logic that deals with that. We also have an API which enables you to create a new front end if you wanted to, but you can also use it if you run a larger environment and you need, for instance, to start or stop a schedule from another application. So instead of logging on to RAPIDIONLINE to do that, you can do that remotely. And then we are supporting many different endpoints. So here the platform comes in and gives you the flexibility to integrate to a lot of other systems in case that would be needed now or sometime in the future. So the pre-configured standard integration, which is on top of the platform, consists of the following 4 components. We have the myrapidi.com, which is the cloud application, where you can do the integration, where you do the configuration, where you have your account, where you do the monitoring, and we have the RAPIDI connector to connect on-premise systems. So that was the thing we talked about just before. Then we have the integration templates, and the templates are actually supporting complete business processes. The library is much bigger than the quote to cash I showed just before. It's pre-configured and built on best practices. And they have been optimized throughout the years, and we have a look at them every 6 months to update according to learnings that we have had throughout the projects, or if Microsoft or Salesforce are launching new capabilities and new features in their applications, we update the integration templates to support that. That also makes it a lot easier for you to upgrade your applications to the next level because you will have templates working already supporting that. They're customizable, so they're basically built in the toolbox. So even though they can be used as a template, you can customize them just as freely as if it was something you did from scratch. They are all fully documented. This is very convenient, especially when we start up the project and we capture the scope and we want to map the different fields. Using the documentation here as the starting point where we have already done all the mapping, identify the different field types and typical actions that you need to have on the different parts of your Nav Salesforce system is something that speeds up the process dramatically, and it gives you a very good overview from the beginning. We have the sales history extension that is an option for you. It's 3 objects that you can import into your Salesforce org. It holds the open orders, the sales history, and the payment history. It's an unmanaged application, which means that either you or your partner can modify this in any way you want. But it has been designed with Microsoft Dynamics in mind. So when you look at your data inside of Salesforce, for instance, an order or a sales history invoice, it would be the same look and feel as you know already from your Microsoft Dynamics system. Support is also included in our standard integration as part of the subscription. You can use the support to maintain your integration. So if you have smaller changes to your integration, for instance, you have a need to add additional fields or you want to apply some filters to the integration, it's something that you can do by raising a ticket with our support. It does not cost you anything extra. If you have bigger chunks of work, let's say that you want to integrate with a new app that you have imported into Salesforce, then it's something that would be quoted. Typically, it takes around 4 hours to do a new table integration between the 2 systems, so it's not very heavy. You can also use the support to resolve data errors. We bring forward the error message that comes from the system that has generated the error, and it would be the exact error that comes from the system. And especially on the Dynamics side, if you're using web services, in the beginning, it's not so easy to understand what these data errors means, and you can get help from our support to identify which record it is that you need to look at and which field in that record that contains the data error. A data error, for instance, can be that you have entered an email address inside of Dynamics, which is not validated in Salesforce as a correct email address. So that is a typical error, and until you get the discipline for the salespeople or whoever is creating the records inside of the Microsoft Dynamics, you will benefit from being notified that something was wrong. As part of the implementation process, we encourage you to align the validation between the systems. So validation happens when you capture the data, because that will eliminate the amount of data errors that you would have in your running environment. These are all the different endpoints that we support, or at least the most common ones. So you can see we have the Salesforce and we have the Microsoft Dynamics suite, but we also have a lot of other ways to integrate applications. All of it in exactly the same platform. So what you will see today, if you have any of these databases or technologies, the way you work with it is exactly the same. If you're still awake, then Sean have prepared a little demo for you to show you how it works. And I'm going to hand over the control to Sean. If you bear with me for a second. Sean, over to you. You have to unmute.
Yes, I'm unmuted now. Thank you. So I hope everybody can see my screen okay. And what I'm showing you is what the RAPIDI platform would look like for a customer that's logging in to work with and monitor their service. Now the service consists of the number of transfers, the schedules that they're set up to run in, our runs and logging information, statistics, groups, connections, and I'll cover the tags in just a minute. The most important thing I want to go back to, Henning had mentioned, and when he showed the slide that shows all of the endpoints that we connect to, is we set those up as connections within your service. So for this particular demo service that I'm showing, we have connections to a couple of different Dynamics Nav versions that are running on some virtual machines within our network. And we also have our connection to our Salesforce demo org. So these are very easy to set up. In particular, the Salesforce one is extremely easy. It's just the username and the password. And you specify if you're connecting to a sandbox or a production environment, And if you're using SSL, click this test to let us know that we're connected and everything is fine and good to go. When Henning was showing and talking about the data toolbox, this is a very important feature of the platform, this read design button. Once we establish the connection and we're talking to the endpoint that we want to talk to, this read design button allows us to import all of the metadata about the endpoint into the RAPIDI platform. And once we do that, it's immediately available to be used in a transfer. And I can show you from our Salesforce side, how easy it is just to add a custom field to Salesforce and have it available immediately to be used in a transfer to a field on the other side, whichever ERP you're connecting to. I also want to point out here that we are looking at on the Dynamics, for MS Dynamics, we have a couple different ways to connect to extract and write data. And one of those ways is a straight SQL connection. Henning had mentioned that we have a direct connection to Microsoft SQL Server database. These work the same ways. Once we establish the parameters for how we connect, this tells our RAPIDI connector what to do in order to get to the data on the endpoint. So in this case, it's the nav database itself that we're connecting to. The RAPIDI connector connects to it, runs in the platform, runs in our cloud platform, and that's how we know how to get the data out. The same thing here, once we test that we can connect and everything's fine, we then read the design, and the entire metadata from the demo database that I'm connected to is now available in the platform to be used when I'm configuring transfers. Likewise, in this particular demo service, we have a connection to a nav web service. This is set up exactly the same. Once we determine the right way to connect to this service, we test the connection, make sure it's okay, we read the design, and then we have the metadata from the web service available. This is really important on the Dynamics side for the different Dynamics products, because adding data and updating data, in the Microsoft Dynamics environment, we want to use the available web services or any web service that one of your partners may have created, or any existing nav web service or GP web stored procedure that they may have updated, so that we have all of the customizations available. I know a lot of people are concerned about the investment they've already made in customizing their Microsoft Dynamics ERP implementations, and this is the way that we handle very easily the customizations. Since we're at the data layer when we're doing this integration, all we need to do is make sure that we're calling the already customized functionality to manage the data inside the application. And within RAPIDI, we don't have to manage any kind of special code to handle any kind of customization on the Salesforce side or on the Microsoft Dynamics side. So this is a way that we handle any kind of customized environment. I mentioned Great Plains. In Great Plains, we use a connection. We can connect to a stored procedure in Great Plains, and it's the same methodology, the same platform. The connections look exactly the same. And when I go to set up a transfer, which I'll show you in a minute, I select the endpoint that I'm connecting to, and then I have access to all that metadata to use in the transfer. So I'm going to take a quick look at a couple transfers here in our demo service. And this is one I was just working on recently. I'm adding contacts from Salesforce to our NAV 2017 demo environment. Now we're doing some work in these, so you're going to see some names that don't exactly align to what I'm talking about. Specifically, we're reusing some fields in Salesforce. But when we set up the transfer, the first thing we do is we define which way the data is moving, the endpoints it's moving between, and what our actions are going to be taking. So we're either going to be updating, adding, deleting. We have some other actions that we can take in here, and we have some other configuration flags that will direct how the systems on each end will work. One nice thing that's built into the platform here is, depending on the combinations of these flags, the way we set them, we can invoke the Salesforce upsert functionality without any kind of additional programming or configuration actions to take. We just say we want to do an update, an add. We disable the destination lookup so we can save on the API calls in Salesforce, and then the Salesforce upsert functionality is automatically invoked. I also want to point out that we have a full-featured source control available here, where we can automatically, within the transfer, in this particular configuration, I'm storing a field. I'm updating a field in my source table when the record is completely transferred. So that way I don't have to go back and do any kind of cleanup. I don't have to do any kind of logging to see what was transferred completely, what wasn't transferred completely. And I'll be able to see it immediately in the source system, in this case, Salesforce. So in this particular configuration, what happens is when the record's transferred, I'm committing each one. And then when the commit is done, then I am updating a field in the source, in this case, Salesforce, to say that this record's transferred. And this allows us to use this field in future transfers to say anything that already hasn't been processed, process it. So it's a very simple way to manage the source control about what was updated, what was not updated, what was added between these systems. We also have other features and functionality within the source control where we can actually, using that same technology, update external keys on either side depending on the direction of the transfer when the transfer is completed. So again, we don't have to go back and do some kind of two-step process where we need to update something because we know it's been transferred completely or anything like that. It all happens within the one transaction. There's also ways we specify like how these items are linked uniquely between the systems, and we have different methods of doing that too, depending on the implementation and the details that we might have to support. And this is a nice feature. You know, I didn't really introduce myself too much, but I have a CRM background. I implemented Siebel for many years, and now I've been working with Salesforce. And one of the nice things about this particular integration technology is that all of your transformations between fields are done at this field level in the data layer, using formulas and functions that are available in the MyRAPIDI platform. So I like to, you know, equate it to being able to write functions in Excel. If you can write functions in Excel, you can use this platform to do any kind of extract transform that you need to do between applications. And you know, all the extraction and transformation is done on the source side, and then we map it directly to the destination. So for this particular example, I'm moving data from Salesforce into Nav, and I'm using a Nav web service to do it because I'm actually adding records, and we want any kind of functionality in Nav to be invoked whenever we add a record, the same as a user would be doing it through the user interface. So I mentioned about the reading design and being able to have all the fields available. So I can go right into this field list and start typing a field name if I know the name, but I also have a handy tool here that I can browse the table layout. And when I look at this, this is showing me all the metadata that's already been loaded into the MyRAPIDI platform that I now have access to. So it automatically populated the Salesforce connection because that's what I'm working with, but I also can look at any other connection that I have defined. So I tend to forget the names of fields, so I'm just going to type one in here. And as soon as I start typing, I get a type ahead match. So I can pick. And if I had a particular field on the nav side that I wanted to map that to, I'm not sure I would want to map it to, so I'd probably look at the table layout again. And again, this is showing me all the data that's available for the service. I don't know the name of the actual web services. So this is a really handy feature for making customizations available in the MyRAPIDI platform very quickly. The other thing I have access to at each transfer is I can apply any number of filters that I want to this. So I can make these transfers as granular as they need to be. And I can make them as wide-ranging and as broad as they need to be.
Sean, we have a question, which is
Sure.
The transfer that you show here, is that how a template looks like for a transfer?
It is. It is exactly how a template looks like for a transfer.
Thank you.
So as Henning mentioned, when the pre-configured integrations are loaded up in a new service, it's a great starting point. I'll tell you, I was a previous customer of RAPIDI because I was a Salesforce BA and admin with a client who was implementing an integration to Nav, and it was really nice to have these pre-configured transfers come out of the box. Like most companies, our special sauce was wrapped up in a modification to the standard best practice, made it really, really easy to modify any of the integrations and got us up and running very quickly. We weren't starting from ground zero. We didn't have to build everything, and it was nice to have examples of how everything worked. The other important feature, there's some advanced features that we would go through, with a customer depending on their particular integration needs. There's a lot of advanced features available in these transfers, so you can run some sub-transfers. You can only impact records that have a particular value on the destination side, so we can combine the filters from the source and filters from the destination. We can create like a one-to-many transfer in the case of some of the Dynamics products. If we have a value coming from Salesforce and we want that to be distributed out to a dimension code, say, we can do that within one transfer. We don't have to have a 2 or 3 step process to make that happen. There's a lot of functionality in here that allow us to move this data the way it needs to be moved for each individual requirement. I think there's another, is there another? Okay. So there is one question here. I just want to address one question, the formula and the address field. So this is interesting because in Salesforce, if you're familiar with it, this address field that they have in Salesforce is a particular type of field that is native to Salesforce. So what we need to do in order to pull out the individual pieces of the address so they get written correctly to the individual address fields in Nav, we use the formulas. In this case, it says, find me the part of Mailing Street that had up to the space, and then find me the next piece up to the space, find me the comma, and split those things out so I can populate them into the individual fields as needed from that long text field called address in Salesforce. So I'll be happy to go over that afterwards if you have any further questions, but that's generally what this formula is doing. And as I mentioned, it's the be able to write formulas like this with these functions. It's very powerful, and it's very flexible because these are like writing Excel functions, even though some of the syntax may be slightly different, but it's very similar to Excel. It's very similar to writing functions in Salesforce also. Okay, so once we have all of our transfers defined, we then get to set these up in schedules. And this is basically telling the MyRAPIDI platform the order that we want these transfers to run, because we will have some dependencies. For instance, having contacts related to the right accounts and customers on each side of the transfer. We want to make sure that the record that needs to be there first is there. So for this example, in this customer group, we're processing the customer transfers first. And in this particular group, for this particular example, we have them going both ways. So we have customers coming from Nav into Salesforce, and we also have accounts coming from Salesforce into Nav customers. And when we just specify we want the group to run, it runs them in this order. So depending on the individual requirements of each implementation, we will set up these transfers to match those requirements. And then the schedule runs. We define how often it runs. This one is set up to run once every day. The days of the week that it will run and the times it will run. So depending on the amount of data you're moving and the volume, you can manage the load across the servers and make sure that everything has an appropriate amount of time to complete. The error handling here, the features of the error handling is very important because we are operating in a cloud platform. You could, drop a connection from a server somewhere. So I've worked with other integration tools where that requires a full restart and you kind of have to clean everything up and reconfigure everything. But this works really nicely with our source control features. So we can say if there's an error, we decide how often we want the schedule to be retried when there's an error, and when we want to be notified when there's an error. So in this case, the RAPIDI platform will just pick up processing from where it left off, and due to the source control, we don't have to start all over. So this is really nice if you're moving 10,000 records, in an update, and something goes wrong at record 9,000, you can just start over again from 9,001. We don't have to go back, clean everything up, reprocess all, 10,000 starting from record number 1. That's a really nice feature to keep things running. And as Henning mentioned, you can set these notification intervals to be as short or as long as you want. It depends on how often you want to be notified. Another very important feature that we have in the platform, you'll see in this example, we have tags specified down here. Now these tags allow us to create one set of transfers that can then be used for multiple companies. So we define the way that RAPIDI is going to connect to the ERP system and which company in the ERP system it's going to be either extracting records from or writing records to. And this will allow us, I'm going to jump back to the transfers for 1 second. This will allow us to set up one transfer that can transfer customers as long as we're using the same field set and filter functionality and things like that. We can just specify which company we want this transfer to run to. So this eliminates the need to have a specific transfer built, that's only ever going to be used to transfer customers from Salesforce into one company. And we can do a lot of things with those tags. They're kind of, think of them as like variable sets that we then apply to the transfers, and when it executes, we know that the data is going into and coming out of the correct company. Excuse me. Now, in some cases, we will also, depending on the environment, we will maintain, if it's necessary, we can maintain a link storage in RAPIDI. This particular example doesn't have one set up. Sorry about that. But we will maintain a cross-reference of unique keys between the endpoints in the systems. That can then also be used in the transfers, and we have features and functionalities that allows the transfer to look up that cross-reference when needed. For instance, in order to write the correct parent account of an invoice if necessary. And again, it's dependent upon each individual requirement and how the data needs to be moved. As Henning mentioned, we also have a full-featured logging and notification capability, so we can see exactly what happened when these transfers are running, when the schedules are running. And we also have a detailed log that shows us exactly what happened. As was mentioned, it will present an error code from the system if there is an error encountered. And so this is an easy way for us to kind of retrace and see what happened during these transfers. It's also a nice method that we have. I just had a client ask if we could develop some kind of timing on how long it takes to move an extremely large amount of data. So we did it in a test environment, and we were able to just go back and use this logging facility and say, like, this is when we started and this is when we ended. And we got a good idea of how fast we're going. On the dashboard, for each service, like I mentioned, this is what a customer would see. We can get the status of the services. It tells us all the connections, and if they're running, they're up and running, and what version they're on. And I can also stop the service and restart it. And here I can also, if I choose to have schedules set up and I'm working on some of these transfers for some reason, I can delay all the schedules for a certain number of hours. So I'm not going to be consuming any of the processing power running the transfer while I'm trying to work on something else. And this is a very nice feature too, because we can just say, okay, let's stop everything for a little bit of time while we get some work done, and then we just restart it, and it restarts automatically.
Okay, Thank you very much, Sean.
Sure. I know we're running out of time there.
Let's
Went over.
see. It does not seem to be any questions to this. Otherwise, please feel free to use the question section. How long does it take to implement the RAPIDI Online solution? I made a little chart here of what it typically takes. If you are on Dynamics GP, NAV, or 365 Business Central, it's typically around 4 to 8 days, everything included from our side. So it can be a very slim process. It can be quoted on time and material as a fixed price. If you are on AX or Dynamics 365 for finance and operations, the normal quote to cash implementation typically takes around 10 days. AX and finance and operations are slightly more complex to do the integration with, and that's why it takes a little longer. But it's only due to the higher complexity in the application itself. It does not take any longer to spread out the implementation over several weeks. So you can configure everything in one go if you choose so, or you can spread it out and go live with the first integrations, and then you can add more later on. At the end of the day, the time it takes is exactly the same, so you can choose the pace that suits your business. You can get a quote for this that includes everything you need. All you need to do is to ask for a session with Sean or me, and then we will during that call identify your requirements, and we will send a written quote to you afterwards that is outlining exactly the project for your integration requirements. RAPIDIONLINE is an old data integration company. We have been doing data integration for more than 20 years. We are Salesforce and Microsoft partner with a worldwide coverage. We have a simple, flexible, and robust solution providing cutting-edge technology that really gives you a huge advantage when you are maintaining your data integration. When we ask customers why they choose RAPIDIONLINE, then the first response is typically because of the application and the depth of the integration. When we ask existing customers why they stay loyal to the RAPIDIONLINE, they typically add our outstanding support on top of that. So that is something that we are very proud of. So RAPIDIONLINE is a flexible standard solution that is simple to implement, robust, and easy to use. It makes it an easy choice for you, and we always have your back on the integration, not only during the implementation, but also afterwards with our outstanding support. We have done our homework providing you with a platform, templates, and tools that gives you perfectly synchronized data and nothing to stress about. And RAPIDIONLINE is a Salesforce recommended solution for the Microsoft Dynamics integration. It is really what we're specialized in, even though we can integrate with a lot of other systems. This is where we do most of our work. We're with you all the way, and we're always happy to help. So you're never alone when you do a data integration project with RAPIDI. We will make sure that everything works when you go live and also afterwards. We offer an all-inclusive program, which means that there are no hidden costs, no bad surprises, and no programming needed. You will get exactly what you need. So all you need to do from here is to start your project, and we will be honored if you choose to work with RAPIDIONLINE. This is all for now. Let me see if there are any questions. It does not seem to be the case. In that case, I want to thank you all for your time. We look forward to continue the discussions after the call, and please feel free to reach out to any of us if there's anything that we can do for you. Thank you very much and have a fantastic day.